exemption has come out since the Hoffa letter. Would he guess Mr. Hoffa is more or less upset now that Washington has been protected, but the working Americans that Mr. Hoffa represents are still in the dire straits described in that letter?
Well, I thank the senator from Louisiana for that very good question, and I thank him also for his support of this effort, his vocal support, his support from day one. I thank him for appearing with us last night, appearing with us today, standing together to defund Obamacare, standing together to oppose cloture because it would empower Harry Reid and the Democrats to fund Obamacare on a partisan 51 vote, party line vote. And it would shut out amendments to address and ameliorate the harms that are coming from Obamacare that are hurting hardworking Americans. Now, as to the question that the senator from Louisiana asked, I certainly don't want to put words in Mr. Hoffa's mouth. He is quite capable of speaking for himself. But I cannot imagine, given the language of his letter, that the exemption for Congress would be in any way different from the exemption for big business. They're both exemptions for political friends of the administration. And according to the language of his letter, he expressed dismay that they, another political friend of the administration, did not get an exemption. Now, I will note, part of that letter is asking, give us a special exemption too, and that didn't happen. But I'll make a prediction, Mr. President. If the Senate doesn't act now, if it doesn't defund Obamacare, if it doesn't stand up and stop this before President Obama leaves the White House, he will grant an exemption to those union bosses. It's the trifecta of the privileged classes being accepted. And look, I understand that politically it was not an opportune time to grant that exception now. Now, it would be lawless. It would be contrary to law to grant an exception for the union bosses, but it's also contrary to law to grant an exemption to big business and grant an exemption to members of Congress, and that hasn't slowed the president down. So if he's willing to disregard the law for them, there's no reason to think he wouldn't be willing to disregard the law for his union boss friends, except for the fact that right in the middle of this defund debate, it's not rocket science, it's the science that would not be ideal politics. I will say the senator from Louisiana's courage in introducing his amendment, he's endured vilification that has been beyond the pale. And I appreciate his courage standing for the basic principle that Congress should be bound by the same rules as everyone else, that the American people, millions of Americans, shouldn't be put onto exchanges subject to pain that members of Congress are not. We should not operate under the principle, one rule for thee, a different one for me. And I'd like, for all of you who say this fight is not winnable, I would like to share, Mr. President, with you a letter talking about fighting and winning unwinnable fights, because none of us can win this fight, but the American people can. Fans of Rush Limbaugh know that every year he reads something that his father wrote about the true story of the price paid by the signers of the Declaration of Independence. I think it's fitting to read this morning. It's called "The Americans Who Risked Everything. Our Lives, Our Fortunes, Our Sacred Honor." It was a glorious morning. The sun was shining and the wind was from the southeast. Up especially early, a tall, bony, red-headed young Virginian found time to buy a new thermometer, for which he paid £3, 15 shillings. He also bought gloves for Martha, his wife, who was ill at home. Thomas Jefferson arrived early at the State House. The temperature was 72.5 degrees, and the horseflies weren't nearly so bad at that hour. It was a lovely room, very large, with gleaming white walls. The chairs were comfortable. Facing the single door were two brass fireplaces, but they would not be used today. The moment the door was shut, it was always kept locked. The room became an oven. The tall windows were shut so that the loud quarreling voices could not be heard by passerby. Small openings atop the windows allowed a slight stir of air, but also a large number of horseflies. Jefferson records that, quote, "The horseflies were dexterous in finding necks, and the silk of stockings was nothing to them." All discussion was punctuated by the slap of hands on necks. On the wall at the back, facing the president's desk, was a panoply consisting of a drum, swords, and banners seized from Fort Ticonderoga the previous year. Ethan Allen and Benedict Arnold had captured the place, shouting that they were taking it, quote, in the name of the great Jehovah and the Continental Congress. Now Congress got to work, promptly taking up an emergency measure about which there was discussion but no dissension, resolved that an application be made to the Committee of Safety of Pennsylvania for a supply of flints for the troops at New York. Then Congress transformed itself into a committee of the whole. The Declaration of Independence was read aloud once more, and debate resumed. Thomas Jefferson was the best writer of all of them, and he had been somewhat verbose. Congress hacked the excess away. They did a good job, as the side-by-side comparison of the rough draft and the final text shows. They cut the phrase "by a self-assumed power." Climb was replaced by "must read." Then "must" was eliminated. Then the whole sentence, and soon the whole paragraph was cut. Jefferson groaned as they continued what he later called their depredations. Inherent and inalienable rights came out, certain unalienable rights. And to this day, no one knows who suggested the elegant change. A total of 86 alterations were made. Almost 500 words were eliminated, leaving 1,337. At last, after 3 days of wrangling, the document was put to a vote. Here in this hall, Patrick Henry had once thundered, "I am no longer a Virginian, sir, but an American." But today, the loud, sometimes bitter argument stilled, and without fanfare, the vote was taken from north to south by colonies, as was the custom. On July 4th, 1776, the Declaration of Independence was adopted. There were no trumpets blown. No one stood on his chair and cheered. The afternoon was waning, and Congress had no thought of delaying the full calendar of routine business on its hands. For several hours, they worked on many other problems before adjourning to the day. Much to lose. What kind of men were the 56 signers who adopted the Declaration and who, by their signing, committed an act of treason against the Crown? To each of you, the names Franklin, Adams, Hancock, and Jefferson are almost as familiar as household words. Most of us, however, know nothing of the other signers. Who were they? What happened to them? I imagine that many of you are somewhat surprised at the names that are not there. George Washington, Alexander Hamilton, Patrick Henry, all were elsewhere. Ben Franklin was the only really old man. 18 were under 40. 3 were in their 20s. Of the 56, almost half, 24, were judges and lawyers. 11 were merchants, 9 were landowners and farmers, and the remaining 12 were doctors, ministers, and politicians. With only a few exceptions, such as Samuel Adams of Massachusetts, these were men of substantial property. All but 2 had families. The vast majority were men of education and standing in their communities. They had economic security as few men had in the 18th century. Each had more to lose from revolution than he had to gain by it. John Hancock, one of the richest men in America, already had a price of 500 pounds on his head. He signed in enormous letters so that His Majesty could now read his name without glasses and could now double the reward. Ben Franklin wryly noted, "Indeed, we must all hang together. Otherwise, we shall most assuredly hang separately." Fat Benjamin Harrison of Virginia told tiny Elbridge Gerry of Massachusetts, "With me, it will all be over in a minute, but you'll be dancing in the air an hour after I am gone." These men knew what they risked. The penalty for treason was death by hanging. And remember, a great British fleet was already at anchor in New York Harbor. They were sober men. There were no dreary-eyed, dreamy-eyed intellectuals or draft card burners here. They were far from hot-eyed fanatics yammering for an explosion. They simply asked for the status quo. It was change they resisted. It was equality with the mother country they desired. It was taxation with representation they desired. They were all conservatives, yet they rebelled. It was principle, not property, that brought these men to Philadelphia. 2 of them became presidents of the United States. 7 of them became state governors. 1 died in office as vice president of the United States. Several would go on to be U.S. senators. 1, the richest man in America, in 1828, founded the Baltimore and Ohio Railroad. 1, a delegate from Philadelphia, was the only real poet, musician, and philosopher of the signers. It was he, Francis Hopkinson, not Betsy Ross, who designed the United States flag. Richard Henry Lee, a delegate from Virginia, had introduced the resolution to adopt the Declaration of Independence in June of 1776. He was prophetic in his concluding remarks. Why then, sir, why do we longer delay? Why still deliberate? Let this happy day give birth to an American republic. Let her arise not to devastate and to conquer, but to reestablish the reign of peace and law. The eyes of Europe are fixed upon us. She demands of us a living example of freedom that may exhibit a contrast in the felicity of the citizen to the ever-increasing tyranny which desolates her polluted shores. She invites us to prepare an asylum where the unhappy may find solace and the persecuted riposte. If we are not this day wanting in our duty, the names of American legislatures of 1776 will be placed by posterity at the side of all those whose memory has been and ever will be dear to virtuous men and good citizens. Though the resolution was formally adopted July 4th, it was not until July 8th that 2 of the states authorized their delegates to sign. And it was not until August 2nd that the signers met at Philadelphia to actually put their names on the declaration. William Ellery, delegate from Rhode Island, was curious to see the signers' faces as they committed this supreme act of personal courage. He saw some men sign quickly, but in no face was he able to discern real fear. Stephen Hopkins, Ellery's colleague from Rhode Island, was a man past 60. As he signed with a shaking pen, he declared, "My hand trembles, but my heart does not." Most glorious service. Even before the list was published, the British marked down every member of Congress suspected of having put his name to treason. All of them became objects of vicious manhunts. Some were taken, some, like Jefferson, had narrow escapes. All who had property or family near British strongholds suffered. Francis Lewis, New York delegate, saw his home plundered, his estate in what is now Harlem completely destroyed by British soldiers. Mrs. Lewis was captured and treated with great brutality. Though she was later exchanged for 2 British prisoners through the efforts of Congress, she died from the effects of her abuse. William Floyd, another New York delegate, was able to escape with his wife and children across Long Island Sound to Connecticut, where they lived as refugees without income for 7 years. When they came home, they found a devastated ruin. Phillips Livingston had all his great holdings in New York confiscated and his family driven out of their home. Livingston died in 1778, still working in Congress for the cause. Lewis Morris, the 4th New York delegate, saw all of his timber, crops, and livestock taken. For 7 years, he was barred from his home and family. John Hart of Trenton, New Jersey, risked his life to return home to see his dying wife. Hessian soldiers rode after him, and he escaped in the woods. While his wife lay on her deathbed, the soldiers ruined his farm and wrecked his homestead. Hart, 65, slept in caves and the woods as he was hunted across the countryside. When at long last, emaciated by hardship, he was able to sneak home, he found his wife had already been buried and his 13 children taken away. He never saw them again. He died a broken man in 1779 without ever finding his family. Dr. John Witherspoon Signer was president of the College of New Jersey, later called Princeton. The British occupied the town of Princeton and billeted troops in the college. They trampled and burned the finest college library in the country. Judge Richard Stockton, another New Jersey delegate signer, had rushed back to his estate in an effort to evacuate his wife and children. The family found refuge with friends But a Tory sympathizer betrayed them. Judge Stockton was pulled from bed at night and brutally beaten by the arresting soldiers. Thrown into a common jail, he was deliberately starved. Congress finally arranged for Stockton's parole, but his health was ruined. The judge was released as an invalid when he could no longer harm the British cause. He returned home to find his estate looted and did not live to see the triumph of the Revolution. His family was forced to live off charity. Robert Morris, merchant prince of Philadelphia, delegate and signer, met Washington's appeals and pleas for money year after year. He made and raised arms and provisions which made it possible for Washington to cross the Delaware at Trenton. In the process, he lost 150 ships at sea, bleeding his own fortune and credit almost dry. George Clymer, Pennsylvania signer, escaped with his family from their home, but their property was completely destroyed by the British in the Germantown and Brandywine campaigns. Dr. Benjamin Rush, also from Pennsylvania, was forced to flee to Maryland. As a heroic surgeon with the Army, Rush had several narrow escapes. John Martin, a Tory in his views previous to the debate, lived in a strongly loyalist area in Pennsylvania. When he came out for independence, most of his neighbors and even some of his relatives ostracized him. He was a sensitive and troubled man, and many believe this action killed him. When he died in 1777, his last words to his tormentors were, quote, "Tell them that they will live to see the hour when they shall acknowledge it," the signing, "to have been the most glorious service that I have ever rendered to my country." William Ellery, Rhode Island delegate, saw his property and home burned to the ground. Thomas Lynch, Jr., South Carolina delegate, had his health broken from privation and exposures while serving as a company commander in the military. His doctors ordered him to seek a cure in the West Indies, and on the voyage, he and his young bride were drowned at sea. Edward Rutledge, Arthur Middleton, and Thomas Hayward, Jr., the other three South Carolina signers, were taken by the British in the seas of Charleston. They were carried as prisoners of war to St. Augustine, Florida, where they were singled out for indignities. They were exchanged at the end of the war, the British in the meantime having completely devastated their large land holdings and estates. Thomas Nelson, signer of Virginia, was at the front in command of the Virginia military forces. With British General Charles Cornwallis in Yorktown, fire from 70 heavy American guns began to destroy Yorktown piece by piece. Lord Cornwallis and his staff moved their headquarters into Nelson's palatial home. While American cannonballs were making shambles of the town, the house of Governor Nelson remained untouched. Nelson turned in rage to the American gunners and asked, "Why do you spare my home?" They replied, "Sir, out of respect to you." Nelson cried, "Give me the cannon." And he fired on his magnificent home himself, smashing it to bits. But Nelson's sacrifice was not quite over. He had raised $2 million for the revolutionary cause by pledging his own estates. When the loans came due, a newer peacetime Congress refused to honor them, and Nelson's property was forfeited. He was never reimbursed. He died impoverished a few years later at the age of 50. Lives, fortune, honor. Of those 56 who signed the Declaration of Independence, 9 died of wounds or hardships during the war. 5 were captured and imprisoned, in each case with brutal treatment. Several lost wives, sons, or entire families. 1 lost his 13 children. 2 wives were brutally treated. All were at one time or another the victims of manhunts or driven from their homes. 12 signers had their homes completely burned. 17 lost everything they owned. Yet not one defected or went back on his pledged word. Their honor and the nation they sacrificed so much to create is still intact. And finally, there is the New Jersey signer, Abraham Clark. He gave 2 sons to the officer corps in the Revolutionary Army. They were captured and sent to that infamous British hulk afloat in New York Harbor, known as the Hell Ship Jersey, where 11,000 American captives were to die. The younger Clarks were treated with a special brutality because of their father. One was put in solitary and given no food. With the end almost in sight, with the war almost won, no one could have blamed Abraham Clark for acceding to the British request when they offered him his sons' lives if he would recant and come out for the King in Parliament. The utter despair in this man's heart, the anguish in his very soul, must reach out to each one of us down through 200 years with his answer: no. The 56 signers of the Declaration of Independence proved by their every deed that they made no idle boast when they composed the most magnificent curtain line in history. And for the support of this declaration, with a firm reliance on the protection of divine providence, we mutually pledge to each other our lives, our fortunes, and our sacred honor. My friends, I know you have a copy of the Declaration of Independence somewhere around the house, in an old history book. Newer ones may well omit it. An encyclopedia, or one of those artificially aged parchments we all got in school years ago. I suggest that each of you take the time this month to read through the text of the Declaration, one of the most noble and beautiful political documents in human history. There is no more profound sentence than this: we hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, and that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. These are far more than mere poetic words. The underlying ideas that infuse every sentence of this treatise have sustained this nation for more than 2 centuries. They were forged in the crucible of great sacrifice. They are living words that spring from and satisfy the deepest cries for liberty in the human spirit. Sacred honor isn't a phrase we use much these days, but every American life is touched by the bounty of this, the Founder's legacy. It is freedom tested by blood and watered with tears. That's the story of the signers of the Declaration of Independence. It's the story of our shared legacy. And I will make this note to my friends on the Republican side of the aisle and the Democratic side of the aisle. As Benjamin Franklin wryly noted, indeed, we must all hang together, otherwise we shall most assuredly hang separately. That's the message all of us should think. Are we going to hang separately because we've disregarded the will, disregarded the view of our constituents, because we've given in to the Washington establishment? Or are we going to stand together and say, let's break the broken pattern of Washington, of empty show votes, of fixed procedures, of ignoring the will of the people, and let's come together, much like James Hoff of the Teamsters has, and say, we will remain silent no longer. We cannot ignore the suffering. The millions of Americans who have lost their jobs, cannot find jobs, have their hours forcibly reduced to 29 hours a week, are facing skyrocketing health insurance premiums, and are losing or at risk of losing their health insurance. Our constituents, the American people, are hurting and suffering, and it is the role of Congress to answer their call. All of us must listen to the people. Together, we must make D.C. listen.
Would the senator from Texas yield for a question and a comment without yielding the floor?
I am happy to yield to my friend from Florida for a question without yielding the floor.
First of all, that's a very inspirational letter that you've read and reminds us of our shared legacy as a nation. It also makes you appreciate the freedoms we have in this country, the opportunity to stand here today and have this vibrant debate. Reminded that around the world people don't have that opportunity. Reminded that around the world people are still losing not just their freedoms but their lives for purposes of speaking out. I will confess that I hope we can avoid the hanging part of the situation that you've outlined, and I'm sure we will because we're so blessed to live in this republic. Senator Cruz, I do something every week where I take letters from my constituents, I read them in a video on the air, and then I answer them. I call it the constituent mailbox, and I've been doing that now since I've gotten here. And that's important because it allows us to answer the real questions of real people and their comments. They're not always nice letters, by the way, so we address those too, because that's important. I think that one of the benefits we have with the advances in technology is that the people we serve and work for can now reach us directly and speak to us in real time, as opposed to the days gone by where people had trouble accessing their elected officials. So, with your indulgence, as you've given me time, you haven't yielded the floor, but as you've given me time, I'd like to read a few of these letters that I've received and emails that I've gotten. I think they're all emails, so I want to read them. The first is from someone named Luis. He lives in Cutler Bay, Florida, which is in South Florida, down where I live in Miami-Dade County. Here's what he writes. He writes, "There are so many companies with a large number of part-time workers. The latest company, Trader Joe's, in which I have a family member, will lose her part-time health benefits because of Obamacare. She works as a substitute English teacher in New Jersey, and the job does not offer any health benefits to part-time substitute teachers. She has to be a full-time teacher in order to receive the health benefits. She decided not to leave her job at Trader Joe's because they offered her health benefits as a part-time worker. Put yourselves as present grandparents and grandparents in her own situation. What a hard pill to swallow. What is she supposed to do now?" So this letter talks about a family member of hers that is a part-time teacher in New Jersey, but also works at a place called Trader Joe's. It's a restaurant. And the reason why she works there is for the health benefits that it offered. But now she's losing that. And unfortunately, she's not alone. This is an article from Bloomberg back on the 19th of September of this year. It highlights all these upheavals that are going on by private employers. UPS is dropping coverage for employed spouses. IBM is reworking its retiree benefits. Let me explain that one for a second. They're going to send their retirees to the private exchanges. They said the move was made to help keep premiums low for the rest of their workers that are impacted by Obamacare. Walgreens, the largest U.S. drugstore chain, has told 160,000 workers that they must buy insurance through a private exchange rather than continuing to have it offered by the company, by Walgreens. This is not alone. Stanford University researchers voiced concerns in a study last week. They wrote that the rising premiums could drive workers from employer plans to coverage under the health law, boosting costs for the government by as much as $6.7 billion. There are other examples of businesses that are doing this. You talked about Trader Joe's. That's a closely held supermarket chain. I said a restaurant. I apologize. Supermarket chain. It said it would end health benefits next year for part-time workers. This is the real disruption in real lives. So one thing is to stand here and have people debate about the theory of Obamacare and what great things it might do for some people, according to the supporters of this law. Another thing is to put a human face on the story. We already know just from this email alone of one person in America living in New Jersey, a part-time teacher and a worker at Trader Joe's, who has lost her benefits and will now be thrown into this uncertain world of exchanges because of this law, because of Obamacare. Here's another email. This one comes from Kissimmee, Florida. That's in Central Florida. You may know that as the home of Walt Disney World. This is from Patty. She writes, as mentioned in your letter, my letter, she's referring to a letter I sent to Secretary Sebelius, urging her to visit SeaWorld to discuss the impact that Obamacare will have when enacted in the near future. I, Patty, the writer of this letter, am a part-time employee at Valencia College in Orlando. This is a community college. By the way, I'm a big fan of community colleges. Community colleges are the backbone of retraining, but it's also the only access point available to many of our people. So if you're out there trying to work to support your family, let's say you are a single parent trying to raise 3 kids and you have to work during the day, community colleges offer one of the few places where you can get an advanced degree and the skills you need for a better job. One of the best ways to improve your pay and your economic security is to get an education. Community colleges are an access point for people all over the country. I'm a huge fan of community colleges. We have great ones in Florida. Valencia is one of the great ones. She is a part-time employee of Valencia College in Orlando. My hours, too, have been cut from 29 hours to 25 hours to avoid any negative impact of the Obamacare Health Care Act. I have numerous emails from my supervisor and human resources stating that my hours are being cut specifically because of this. I have lost the hours that made it possible to live in a severely reduced income and know that I will never get those hours back as positions have been created by the extra hours. So we have more people working and earning less. I'm not really asking anything. I'd just like you to know what this government is doing to my ability to survive. This is not an email from a millionaire or a billionaire. This is not an email from someone who has made it, is making a ton of cash. This is an email from a part-time worker at a community college with desperation that comes out from the email. Part-time worker losing hours. You know what those hours mean? 4 hours a week of pay cut to someone? She writes about it. She says, I would just like you to know what this government is doing to my ability to survive. You want to know why a growing number of Americans are starting to doubt whether the American dream is still alive? Read this email. Unfortunately, we're hearing stories about this all the time. Here's an article from CNBC, published Monday the 23rd of September, this week. It leads off with this line. With open enrollment for Obamacare about to begin, small and medium-sized businesses are not hiring because of the uncertainty surrounding the implementation of the new law, says the CEO of the nation's fifth-largest staffing company. Quote, companies are really not interested in hiring full-time people. That's really the issue with Obamacare, Express Employment Professionals boss Bob Funk told CNBC's Squawk Box on Monday. By the way, Mr. Funk is the former chairman of the Kansas City Federal Reserve. Now, someone, the former auto czar at the Treasury, Mr. Steve Ratner, disputes his assertion. He says, I don't think with the approach of Obamacare you see the numbers of people suddenly stopping hiring. But Mr. Funk argues, and he counters very persuasively. He says, quote, we're out there on mainstream, and Obamacare is affecting the job hiring picture. Whether it's in the numbers or not, it is affecting small and medium-sized businesses. They are not going to hire until they know what their costs are going to be. We don't know what the rules are going to be, Funk added. But they haven't written half of the rules, and it's affecting businesses and permanent hiring out there. That's why our industry is growing quite rapidly, unquote. So here you have a person tied to the government basically saying, well, these guys out there don't know what they're talking about. The numbers don't bear this out. And then you have someone who reminds them, I'm on the front lines. That's what Mr. Funk is doing. He's on the front lines. He's seeing what's happening, and he's very clear. He says we are out there on mainstream, and Obamacare is affecting the job hiring picture. You read it in this email. Listen what she says. This is from Patty in Kissimmee. This is what she says. I have lost the hours that made it possible to live in a severely reduced income and know that I will never get those hours back as positions have been created by the extra hours. You know what she's saying? She's saying what they've done is they've reduced her hours and then just hired additional people to make it up. They've created another part-time job to make up for it. This is the impact of Obamacare. By the way, with all due respect to my colleagues, look, I will tell you right now, in case people are wondering, every single member of the Republican conference here in the Senate is prepared to repeal Obamacare right now. The debate we're having in the party, you hear all this noise in the media, the debate we're having is about the tactics, the right way to do it. The one thing I would say, however, is what the last day has provided us is an extraordinary opportunity to tell these stories. There's more. Here's an email from Bill in Panama City, Florida. That's in Northwest Florida. Great place for spring break if you're in college and can afford to go. Maybe you've lost your part-time job, so now you can't. Here's what Bill writes. This is just a note to let you know that you can include me as another one of your constituents who has seen my health care costs go up by over $200 a month. And I also just learned that my girlfriend, who works for a major corporation, is losing her health care after she retires because of Obamacare. I hope you will continue your fight to defund this disastrous bill. Well, I wish, Bill, that obviously you feel terrible for the situation you're facing, certainly for the situation that your girlfriend is facing. Unfortunately, you're not alone. Let me read you something that Jim Angle from Fox News published on the 24th of this month. I guess that was yesterday, right? He tells the story of Andy and Amy Mangione of Louisville, Kentucky, and of their two boys. And he leads off by saying, these are just the kind of people who should be helped by Obamacare. But they recently got a nasty surprise in the mail. When I saw, this is a quote, when I saw the letter, this is Andy's quote, Andy Mangione, when I saw the letter when I came home from work, he described it as a large red wording on the envelope from his insurance carrier, and it said, "Your action required, Benefit Changes Act now." He said, of course I opened it immediately. And guess what that letter had in the mail? It had stunning news. His insurance, the insurance for his family, his 2 boys, his wife, and him, insurance that they were buying in the individual marketplace, was going to almost triple next year, from $333 a month to $965 a month. And in the letter, the carrier made it clear that the increase was in order to be compliant with the new health care law. Mr. Mangione goes on to say, this isn't a Cadillac plan. This isn't even a silver plan. This is a high-deductible plan where I'm assuming a lot of risk for my health insurance for my family. And nothing has changed. Our boys are healthy. They're young. My wife is healthy. I'm healthy. Nothing in our medical history has changed to warrant a tripling of our premiums. His wife adds, well, I'm the one that does the budget. Eventually, I've got that coming down the pike that I've got to figure out where we're going to cut, what we're going to do to afford a $1,000 a month premium. The insurance carrier, Humana, they declined to comment for the story, but the notice that they sent, it had a paragraph that said the following, quote, if your policy premium increased, you should know that this isn't unique to Humana. Premium increases generally will occur industry-wide. Increases aren't based on your individual claims or changes in your health status, it continued. Many factors go into your premium, including ACA compliance, which is Obamacare, including the addition of new essential health benefits. Robert Zirkelbach, who's the spokesman for American Health Insurance Plans, right, which represents insurers, explained that, quote, for people who currently choose to purchase a high-deductible, low-premium policy that's more affordable for them, they are now being required by Obamacare to add all these new benefits to their policy. And that, he says, is going to add to the cost of their health care and health insurance premiums. This is a real-life story. This is not a letter from a millionaire or a billionaire, and this is not the story of a millionaire or a billionaire. This is a story of a husband, a wife, and 2 children who are buying insurance as individuals from the individual marketplace, who will now have to cobble together another $700 a month, and they have no idea how they're going to do it. This is the real story of Obamacare. Here it is. These are the people we're supposed to be helping. These are the people that when they passed this thing, they went around telling people, we're going to help you get insurance. These are the people this is supposed to be helping. And look what it's doing. I wish that was the only example, but I got an email here from Florida that says them too. Here's another email. This one's from Barbara in Palm Coast, Florida. I'm a master's level RN, she's a nurse, who up until last week held a good job with good benefits. Due to the many new restrictions on employers, I have been reduced to part-time without benefits at age 64. It's starting to sound like a broken record. My health care workers are being cut in hours due to Obamacare. My company tried to offer me an insurance plan that I could afford to purchase, but I received a letter stating that it didn't meet the standards of the Affordable Care Act, and so I had to until January 1st to purchase more costly insurance or have consequences. This is terrible. This is a terrible, despicable law, she writes, and I agree, that has damaged many more people than just myself. And then she closes with this extremely powerful sentence, okay? This is not from a millionaire or a billionaire, from the infamous 1%ers that you hear these protests against. This is from a nurse in Florida. And here's what she finishes with. I just want to live in a free country where I can work hard and support myself. Repeal this Obamacare. Well, you may ask yourself, is this really happening? People are losing access to their coverage? Let me read you something from a conservative right-wing newspaper, the New York Times, September 22nd, 2013. Federal officials often say that health insurance will cost consumers less than expected under President Obama's health care law, but they rarely mention one big reason. Many insurers are significantly limiting the choices of doctors and hospitals available to consumers. One more impact of Obamacare. They have created smaller networks of doctors and hospitals than they are typically found in the commercial insurance plans. In a new study, the Health Research Institute of PricewaterhouseCoopers, the consulting company, says that insurers passed over major medical centers when selecting providers in states like California, Illinois, Indiana, Kentucky, and Tennessee, among other states. In New Hampshire, Anthem, Blue Cross and Blue Shield, a unit of WellPoint, one of the nation's largest insurers, has touched off a furor by excluding 10 of the state's 26 hospitals from the health insurance plan that it will sell through its exchange. By the way, Anthem is the only commercial carrier offering health plans in this exchange. What does this mean? Let me tell you what this means. Obamacare says, if you can't find insurance, we're going to set up these government exchanges. And theoretically, it's not a terrible idea. You go online, you shop between different companies, they compete against each other, you find a price that works for you, and that's where you go. That's where people are going to be required to go. That's where the people that got cut off the Walgreens insurance plan have to go now. That's where a bunch of other people have to go now. What are these companies doing? A couple things are happening. First, in states like New Hampshire, only one insurance company applied. So there is no choice, there is no competition. The exchange is one company, Anthem. Number two, what are these companies doing in order to offer these plans? They're basically narrowing the doctors and the hospitals that will see you. Now you may say, well, at least they get to go to a hospital or a doctor. Let me tell you where the problem is. Remember what they said when this passed? If you have health insurance and you like it, if you have a doctor and you're happy with that doctor, you can keep it. Not if you're on the exchange. Because if they're narrowing the number of people, the number of doctors and providers, that means chances are that you will no longer be able to keep going to the same doctor in the same hospital you were going to before. So now let's work that out. Let's walk through this for a second. Put yourself in the position of this nurse that wrote us. Let's say you're chronically ill. Let's say your child has asthma or some other condition. Let's say you just have 4 healthy kids, but you got to take them to the doctor at least once a year, right? And you love the doctor you go to. They know your family. They know your history. When you have a problem, you can call them on the phone. At 2 in the morning, you get a call right back. It avoids emergency room visits, by the way. You can get your doctor on the phone. Now you wake up, and all of a sudden, your company comes to you and says, hey, the insurance plan you're on right now, we're not offering it anymore. Go get it at the exchange. So you go over to the exchange, and you find 2 things. One, it's more expensive. And number 2, your doctor ain't on the plan. That's a broken promise. That's specifically what they said this law wouldn't do, and that's what it's doing. This is the real-life story of what's happening. You want to know why there's passion about this issue? You want to know why every Republican member of the Senate wants to repeal this thing? You want to know why privately some Democrats wish it would go away? Because of this. This is who we're fighting for. This is not just a fight against a bad law. This is a fight on behalf of people across this country that are going to be hurt by this. By the way, I have no idea, these people that have written me or others that are suffering, I don't know who they voted for in the last election. It doesn't matter. I don't know if they ever voted for me in 2010. I don't know if they supported the law when it first came out. But I know they're being hurt by this. And I know they're being hurt by this in ways that will hurt all of us. That will hurt every single one of us. I talked about it earlier this morning. I repeat it today. There is nothing more important than preserving, reclaiming, and restoring the American dream. It's the essence of what makes us special as a country. It separates us from the world. What is the American dream? It's pretty straightforward. This is a country where if you work hard and you sacrifice, you should be able to get ahead and earn a better life for yourself and for your family. Does this sound like the story of a law that's making it easier for people to get ahead? Does being moved from full-time to part-time work make it easier to get ahead? Of course not. Does losing a doctor that you're happy with make it easier to get ahead? Of course not. Does the fact that businesses are not hiring make it easier to get ahead because they're afraid of Obamacare? Does it make it easier to get ahead? Of course not. Does having your hours reduced from 29 to 26, whatever the figure was I read a moment ago, does that make it easier to get ahead? Of course not. If for no other reason, this law needs to be repealed because of the impact that it's having on the American dream. And I will reiterate what I've said time and again on this floor and here as part of this process. You lose the American dream, you lose the country. What you have then is just another rich and powerful country, but no longer an exceptional one. The American dream is at the cornerstone of what makes us different and special. And it's being threatened by this. And that's why I feel so passionately we must do everything we can. everything we can to call attention to what this is doing and try to change it. And I think, if nothing else, Senator, the great service of these last, 19 hours, as your tie continues to loosen, if nothing else, I think people today across this country know more about this law and its impacts than they did a day ago. If nothing else, the people in this country are now increasingly aware of all the implications of this law on their lives, on their dreams, on their hopes, and on their families. And I believe this is just the beginning. And I hope that we can prevent these harmful effects from happening. But it doesn't sound like it. It sounds like there are still people here that are willing to shut down the government unless this thing is fully funded, unless we continue to pour your hard-earned taxpayer dollars. And the irony of it is, for Lewis in Cutler Bay, for Patty in Kissimmee, for Bill in Panama City, for Barbara on the Palm Coast, Florida, for all the people in these articles that were cited, for the Mangione family in Louisville, Kentucky, guess whose money's paying for this disaster? Yours. Your taxpayer dollars are paying for this catastrophe because of the stubbornness of saying this is our law and we're going to go through with it no matter all these anecdotal things that are coming out. And by the way, the only way you can get relief from the negative impacts of this law is if you can afford to hire a lobbyist to come up here and get you a waiver. The only way that you can avoid some of the disastrous impacts of these laws is if you can somehow figure out a way to influence this administration to write the rules in a way that benefit you. That's wrong. That is wrong. And I hope we will do something about this, and I think the last 19-some-odd hours have been a huge step in that direction. Senator, I'm sure that, I guess my question would be to Senator Cruz, I'm sure you're getting letters like these from Texas and across the country, given the events of the last day. This is what this is all about, isn't it? This is not a fight just against a law. This is a fight on behalf of the people who are being hurt by it in the most fundamental way possible. It's hurting their hopes and dreams they have for themselves, for their family. It's undermining the American dream. Is that not what this is all about?
I thank the junior senator from Florida, and I would note that is precisely what this is about. This is a fight for the millions of men and women who are facing a stagnant economy, who are facing jobs that are drying up or disappearing altogether, who are finding themselves being forcibly put in part-time work, being forced to go into working 29 hours a week or less, who are finding their health insurance premiums skyrocketing, and who are being threatened or facing already their health insurance being taken away. All of these are the very real consequences of Obamacare right now for millions of Americans. Listen, there are people in this body who, in good faith, 3.5 years ago, could have believed this was a good idea. It might work. I didn't think it at the time, but I understand that people in this body did. At this point, with all the evidence, I would suggest that that case can no longer be made, that the evidence is abundantly clear. It's why the unions are jumping ship. It's why members of Congress have asked for an exemption. It's why it is now abundantly clear that this train wreck, this nightmare, is hurting Americans all over this country. Now, I will note a couple of things. First of all, I note that my assistant majority leader is on the floor, and I would make a request that either, I do not know if the assistant majority leader is in a position to speak for the majority leader, or if he is not, I would make a request, if the majority leader is monitoring this proceedings, that he come to the floor, because I would like to promulgate a series of unanimous consent requests. And I don't want to surprise the majority leader or the assistant majority leader, so I would like the opportunity to explain those requests before promulgating them, to give Democratic Party leadership an opportunity to think about it, to spend a little bit of time contemplating it, to make a decision whether they would consent or not. And so I would make a request, unless the assistant majority leader is prepared to speak for the majority leader, that I would ask that the majority leader, if he can, I know his schedule is certainly very busy, but I would ask if he can to come to the floor so that I may lay out the unanimous consent request that I would like to promulgate. I would also note that for some time Senator Grassley from Iowa has been waiting, and he has requested the time to raise a question. So if Senator Grassley at this point would like to ask a question,
Mr. President, I would like to, enter into a dialogue with the senator from Texas without jeopardizing his control of the floor, if I could have consent for that purpose.
Without objection.
As long as the senator from Texas, without
on the
yielding,
condition that it does not jeopardize in any way my control of the floor, I am amenable to that request.
First, I don't come in the place of the majority leader. He will speak for himself. We don't know what your unanimous consent request might be. If you would articulate it or describe it, I'm sure that we'll take it under consideration, as we do with any request from any senator. But this comes as a surprise at this moment, as you can understand. I just wanted to come to the floor and continue the dialogue which we started last night. After listening to my friend, colleague, Senator Rubio, describe a situation, I wanted to ask the senator from Texas if I could ask him a question about the situation he described. Senator Rubio talked about the insurance exchanges or the insurance marketplaces and the fact that some of the lowest cost health insurance plans that are being offered have limitations as to doctors and hospitals that a person can use under those low-cost plans. And I would ask the senator from Texas, I talked to him last night about Judy, who is a housekeeper in a motel in southern Illinois at 62 years of age, has worked her entire life, has never had health insurance one day in her life, not once, never had it offered by an employer, never could afford it, now will be able to have health insurance for the first time in her life. And she qualifies under Medicaid in the state of Illinois. She won't pay for it. It's going to be coverage. In her case, even a limitation of doctors and hospitals is a dramatic improvement over no doctor, no hospital, and relying on emergency rooms for her diabetes. So I'd ask the senator from Texas, try to put yourself in the shoes of this woman who has worked her entire life. If you're being told you have a limitation on doctors and hospitals that you can use, but you have health insurance, isn't that a dramatic improvement over a lifetime of no health insurance? That's what Obamacare is going to offer to her for the first time in her life. To say that we shouldn't give her that opportunity is like someone saying, if you can't fly first class, you can't get on the airplane. Listen, a lot of people would be glad to sit back in economy if they can just make the trip that you and I can make because we're blessed with health insurance. So I would say to him, as you condemn Obamacare, I go back to the question I asked you last night. Judy, 62 years old, a lifetime of work, diabetes, first chance to get health insurance. Do you want to abolish the Obamacare program that will give Judy that first chance?
I thank the senator from Illinois for that question, and I would respond threefold. Number one, for Judy, as you've described her circumstances, I would certainly support health care reform that increases competition, that increases free market alternatives, that lowers the rate of health insurance that is available to people by allowing interstate competition, creating a national marketplace. But in my view, any health care reform should empower individuals and patients to make health care decisions in consultation with their physicians, not having a government bureaucrat get in between them and their doctor. And if I may finish the remainder of my points. Concomitantly, you have told the story of Judy, and I do think we should have reforms to address her circumstance. But over the course of the last many hours, we have read scores, if not hundreds of stories that are a small representation of the thousands or millions of people that are losing or at jeopardy of losing their health insurance right now. And they have to be balanced in this equation as well. And Obamacare is causing people all over this country to lose their health insurance or be at risk of losing their health insurance. And I am sure, if I were to promulgate the question to the senator from Illinois, do you want all of these people who are losing their health insurance to lose their health insurance? All of the names that I read, I'm sure you would say no, but to date, no one on the Democratic side of the aisle has proposed any way to fix that. Now, let me make a second point, and then I'm going to have a third point, and then if the senator would care for another question, I'm happy to do my best to respond. The second point Senator from Illinois made a reference to Judy not needing to be in first class, but being content to be in coach. You know, I think that analogy is a powerful one, but what it really highlights is the special exemption that's been put in place for members of Congress. Because President Obama has put an exemption in place for members of Congress that says members of Congress will fly first class, to use your airline analogy. But average Americans who are being forced onto exchanges where their employers can't subsidize their premiums are not even flying coach, they're being put in the baggage compartment. And I will say I agree with the intent and the spirit of Senator Grassley's amendment to Obamacare that was adopted, that is part of the law that the President is disregarding, which is that if we are going to force millions of people to lose their health insurance, be forced into these exchanges, then we should have skin in the game. Congress should not be treated any better than the millions of Americans we're forcing onto the exchanges.
That point.
Let me make my third point, and then I'm happy to yield at that point for a question. The third point is twice I have read in the course of this debate the letter from Mr. Hoffa, the head of the Teamsters. Now, I assume the senator from Illinois has read that letter. In fact, I expect the senator from Illinois has had direct conversations with the author of that letter, although I don't know that. And I would ask the senator from Illinois, number one, has he read that letter? Number two, does he think Mr. Hoffa is telling the truth? And number three, in particular, does he agree with the following paragraph? On behalf of the millions of working men and women we represent and the families they support, we could no longer stand silent in the face of elements of the Affordable Care Act that will destroy the very health and well-being of our members, along with millions of other hardworking Americans. And so, my question is, do you believe Mr. Hoffa is telling the truth when he says that? And if so, does the Democratic majority in this body have any plans, any proposals, any amendments to fix that problem for what Mr. Hoffa describes as millions of working men and women whose health care will be, and the word he uses is destroyed? And I would happily welcome the senator from Illinois.
I thank the senator from Texas for this dialogue. First-class health care. Let me tell you who has first-class health care. The senator from Texas has first-class health care. The senator from Illinois has first-class health care. You see, members of Congress, members of the Senate and the House, under the Federal Employees Health Benefit Program, the best health insurance in America. We fly first class. Our employer, the federal government, as it does for every other federal employee, pays 72% of the monthly premium. 150 million Americans have that benefit, where the employer pays some share of it. Ours pays 72%. We're lucky. We're fortunate. So are our families, and so are our staff. But what you're saying in abolishing Obamacare, you not only want to fly first class, you don't want other people to get on the plane. 50 million Americans have no health insurance, and you want to abolish the opportunity through the marketplace for them to buy affordable health insurance for the first time in their lives for many people. That's what it comes down to. Don't say you want members of Congress treated like everybody else if you are currently under the Federal Employees Health Benefit Program. May I ask you, Senator Cruz, are you currently, you and your family, covered by the Federal Employees Health Benefit Program, which includes a 72% employer contribution from the federal government for your family's health care protection?
I appreciate the senator's question, but I will answer the senator's question when the senator first answers the three questions that I asked him, none of which the senator has chosen to answer, which are namely, have you read Mr. Hoffa's letter?
I will go
Do you
further.
agree with that paragraph? Do you think he's telling the truth? And what, if anything, does the Democratic majority purport to do about millions of working men and women whose health care, according to Mr. Hoffa, is being destroyed? Because I would note the senator from Illinois made an allegation impugning my motives, saying that I wanted 50 million people to be denied health care. And let me be very clear. That statement is categorically false. I want a competitive marketplace where health care is accessible, is affordable, where it's purchased across state lines, where it's personal, where it's portable, and where people have jobs so they can get health insurance. And Obamacare is what's denying health insurance to millions of Americans. And if you don't take my word for it, I assume you do not contend that Mr. Hoffa is being less than truthful in this.
I'd like to respond to that. If this were a courtroom and you're an attorney, I once practiced law myself, I would say, Your Honor, the witness refused to answer the question about his very own health insurance policy. Now let me address the issue about Mr. Hoffa. I've been approached by many labor unions. Some of them have Taft-Hartley plans, some of them have trust fund plans, some have multi-state plans, and they need provisions made in the Obamacare law to deal with their specific circumstances. Under the ordinary course of legislative and congressional business, over the last 3 years, we would have addressed these anomalies in the Obamacare program. Sadly, we can't get anyone to come to the table from your political party. 42 or 43 times the House Republicans have voted to abolish Obamacare. Not once have they proposed sitting down to work out any differences, work out any problems within the law. I'm prepared to do that. I've told the labor unions, including Mr. Hoffa, the same. I know the administration feels the same. But unfortunately, those who are opposed to this plan want it to descend into chaos. They want as much confusion, as many problems as possible. They don't want to work to cover the 50 million uninsured in America. What you just described and said you could sign up for, frankly, is Obamacare. We are talking about a marketplace. Do you know how many companies will be offering health insurance in the state of Texas under the Obamacare plan? Let me make sure I get this correct. It's my understanding at least 54 plans are going to be offered in the state of Texas. 54. Choice and a marketplace for the first time ever for many people who are stuck with one plan or can't get into any plan. Let me ask you this question as we get back to this point. Do you still believe that we should abolish that provision in Obamacare that says you can't discriminate against people with pre-existing conditions who apply for health insurance?